The Cellar.
Sterkfontein is a set of limestone caves of special interest in paleoanthropology. The caves are located in Gauteng province, about 40 kilometers or 25 miles northwest of Johannesburg, South Africa. A little fun fact, Johannesburg itself has been one of director Neil Blomkamp's favorite shooting locations for films he has done in the past. Most notably, the excellent sci-fi film District 9 was filmed there, as well as the movie Chappie. The Sterkfontein Caves are located in an area that has become known as the cradle of humankind. It's been given this name as it is the home to the largest known concentration of human ancestral remains anywhere in the world. In the late 1890s, modern excavation of the caves would begin. Early miners would immediately notice an abundance of fossils. With these early discoveries, a lot of attention was brought to the caves, including many scientists who were interested in studying the many discoveries and secrets this part of the world had to offer. In 1936, further excavations of the Sterkfontein Cave would begin. Soon, a discovery was made of the first adult Australopithecine. What is an Australopithecine, you may ask? Well, I won't act like I'm an expert, but from my research I found that Australopithecus was an adaptive radiation of hominins that lived 4.2 to 2 million years ago. To put it even more simply, they were a group of extinct primates and humans' earliest dated ancestor. Soon after these discoveries, World War II would begin. This would put a stop to all work within the caves until after the war had finally come to an end. Dr. Robert Broom would soon continue his work, and in 1947 he discovered a nearly complete skull of an adult female. The skull would widely go on to be known as Mrs. Pless. Mrs. Pless is the popular nickname for the most complete skull of an Australopithecus africanus ever found in South Africa. And that now brings us to September 29th, 1984, the day that today's story takes place. On this day, 29-year-old Peter Verhulsel and two of his friends made the decision to go cave diving in the Sterkfontein Caves. Peter was described by those who knew him as an adrenaline junkie, a man that was not afraid of anything and had no issue staring fear in the face. He had an appetite for taking risks, and those risks were no different as he and two of his buddies entered the water and began exploring the Sterkfontein Cave system. To provide some further context, this wasn't Peter's first time exploring the cave system. If you asked Peter himself, he would most likely have told any of us that he was a very experienced cave diver. But in reality, he was the most inexperienced diver out of the group on that day in September of 1984. Cave diving, no matter how experienced or how confident you may be, is extremely dangerous. Just from diving into a handful of stories myself, I recognize that anything and everything can go wrong, even for the most experienced and prepared divers. As Peter and his friends ventured into the cave, their goal on this day was to measure the depth of the lake that was located in Milner Hall. Milner Hall being one of the many chambers within the cave that had already been discovered and named prior to 1984. The group of men had talked prior and had a very simple plan laid out for the day. Follow the guideline in until it ended, and then turn around and come right back out of the cave. The entire dive was expected to take under an hour in total, and the men brought with them what they felt was more than enough gas for the trip. Each member of the group had one light fixed to them each as they entered the water and began following the guideline. Peter Verhulsel would end up as the rearmost diver in the group as they worked their way through the passages ahead of them. As the group reached the middle of the cave, one of Peter's friends noticed him wandering away from the guideline and heading down one of the many offshoots located within. The pair stopped and patiently waited for Peter and his light source to return to them. Luckily, after only a few moments, Peter would return and rejoin the group. It was at this point that one of Peter's friends would motion to him that he needed to stay with the guideline moving forward. The group would once again set off deeper into the cave, and once again, only minutes later, Peter would wander down another passage and away from the guideline. Peter's friends would wait for him, and once again, Peter would return. Now, these moments may seem like some harmless exploration, but one of the most important rules in cave diving is to never leave the guideline, or at the very least, never let the guideline out of your direct sight. Ultimately, Peter's propensity for risk-taking would end up being his undoing in the end. As the group continued on deeper into the cave, Peter would once again make the decision to wander off on his own and away from the guideline. Peter's friends would notice him going off to their right and down a passageway. They waited and watched his light disappear in the distance, expecting Peter to return once again, like he had done twice before. But as seconds turned to minutes, Peter and his light did not reappear. As Peter worked his way down the side passage, he would soon come to realize that the way he chose to go was a maze of passages and dead ends. Peter initially felt confident that he knew where he was going, but as he made his way back to his friends, he would begin running into dead end after dead end after dead end. The realization would soon come to Peter that he was completely lost. Peter would soon check his gas and came to a realization that he had burned through quite a bit of it already. Luckily for Peter, he managed to locate one of the many underwater lakes within the cave. I will display a picture that shows you all what one of these underwater lakes looks like so you can get an idea of the situation Peter was now in. Peter was able to pull himself out of the water and onto the island. He removed his mask and at the very least was happy in that moment that he would not drown in the water. At this point, Peter still had enough gas to get out of the cave, but only if he knew exactly where he was going and was able to find the guideline. He didn't have any clue as to where he needed to go, so he made the decision to sit there and wait patiently for rescue. Peter's friends would soon make every effort to try and locate Peter, but with their gas running low, they had to make the difficult decision to eventually leave the cave. Once they were outside, they soon called for help. Police divers would show up that evening and begin looking for Peter, but after not locating him all night, the search was soon called off. With the police now feeling confident that this was more of a body recovery than an actual search and rescue. Little did they know that Peter was still alive. As Peter had waited on his little island, he soon fell asleep from stress and exhaustion. He would awake and assumed it was the next day, but he really had no way of telling what time it was or how much time had passed. He had no food and very little battery power left in his flashlight. He had a little bit of gas left, but not enough to waste time trying to find a way out. He also knew that if he made another attempt to dive out of there, he may not find his way back into the chamber full of oxygen. His best bet was to wait and continue to hope that someone found him. Outside of the cave, the rescue operation was still underway, but with rescuers believing that Peter had drowned, their focus had soon shifted to a body recovery. In the initial search for Peter, the passages had been stirred up quite a bit. When silt is stirred up, it can make visibility next to impossible. The rescue teams wanted to wait and let the cave settle, so they would end up waiting an entire week before they re-entered the cave. At this point, the police were only entering and searching for Peter on the weekends. Each week would pass, and the police would re-enter Saturday and Sunday, hoping to locate Peter's body. Inside the cave, Peter must have been in absolute hell. He had very little battery life, and very little gas to try and swim out of the cave. Peter must have been constantly battling with himself on whether or not to attempt to swim out of there. In complete darkness, the human psyche can break down, as light and sound deprivation can be one of the most horrifying forms of torture on the human brain. Peter kept waiting, starving slowly in the dark, alone. constantly hoping that someone would come up out of the water and rescue him from the absolute nightmare he was now living in. But that help didn't come. After a few weeks of waiting in the dark, Peter's body would slowly break down and lose fat and then muscle. He would get weaker and weaker, finally reaching a point where even if he wanted to try and swim out, his body simply couldn't function or sustain that kind of exertion. After weeks of surviving, all Peter could continue to do was wait. The police would continue their weekend searches for 6 weeks before finally calling off the recovery efforts. The police decided at this point to keep the wet portions of the cave closed off to divers, but they would allow the dry portions to reopen. As soon as the dry portions of the caves reopened, volunteers would begin exploring the caves in hopes of finding a connection of some kind with the water-filled cave that Peter had gotten lost within. Soon a connection with the caves that Peter had been lost within was found, and once this was found, it didn't take long before a discovery of footprints would be made. The footprints would be followed in both directions, and eventually, an astonishing discovery would be made. The emaciated body of Peter Verhulsel was discovered, still laying on the island right near the water's edge. It was apparent very quickly that Peter had not drowned like the police initially thought he did. In fact, Peter had astonishingly survived within the cave for around 3 to potentially 4 weeks before he simply starved to death. Near his body, written in the sand, a message was found. It simply read, "I love you, Cheryl and Ma." Cheryl was Peter's wife, the woman that he had long hoped he would find a way back to one day. Peter held on for weeks, pushing the human body and psyche to the absolute brink of what it's capable of. At the end of the day, what Peter endured, well, it's not something I would wish on my own worst enemy. It also begs the question, what if the police had kept the dry caves open? Could Peter have been discovered in time? Based on how quickly he was located once the caves were reopened, it leads one to believe that this story may have had a different outcome. Peter had no way to signal to anyone that he was still alive, and I'm sure he contemplated and struggled immensely with his decision to leave the guideline like he did on that day. At the end of it all, let's let Peter's story be a reminder of the dangers of cave diving. Let's also let it be a reminder of the dangers of not following the many golden rules of diving. My deepest condolences go out to Peter as well as all of his family and friends. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode, and if you enjoy the content, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps the channel continue to grow, and it's 100% free for you to do. Also, if you want to make sure you never miss a new upload on the channel, you can turn on that bell notification after you've subscribed. In the description box below, you will find a link to my merch store and a link to the Cellar Dwellers membership tier for the channel. If you're interested, please take a moment to check those things out. If you'd like to submit your own scary story or any kind of story recommendation, you can do so using the email that is also linked in the description box below. As always, I do all the research, writing, recording, and editing for the channel myself, so anything that you do to support this channel is greatly appreciated. And until next time, I will see you all again as we head back into the cellar.